want open borders where prisoners from all over the world are allowed to come into our country.
Tonight, we're in Texas, and the top issue here for the 2024 race, immigration. The fight over the issue in this country has been top of mind for former President Donald Trump since the day he announced he was running for president again, referring to the men, women, and children coming into America as agents of crime and corruption, accusing them of eating pets, escaping asylums, and flooding our borders as he puts pressure on Vice President Kamala Harris. But is that rhetoric working to gain the former president new voters or only cement the ones already in his favor?
I reject the false choice that suggests we must either choose between securing our border or creating a system of immigration that is safe, orderly, and humane. We can and we must do both.
She sought to project a tougher stance on illegal migration and address one of her biggest vulnerabilities just a month ago during a rare visit to the border. Now Vice President Harris is finding it's that issue of immigration that could make or break her chance at the White House. We speak with the co-chair of the Harris-Walz campaign for an in-depth look at how they could turn one of the vice president's greatest weaknesses around with just 8 days until the election.
We need clear legal pathways for people seeking to come into our country.
On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history.
All that and more in our ABC News Live primetime coverage, the race for the White House. Good evening, everyone. I'm Linsey Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us. Welcome to a special edition of the Race to the White House. We are here in the state of Texas, where, as you know, the saying goes, everything is bigger in Texas. Immigration, abortion, and the battle for control of the U.S. Senate all loom large in the Lone Star State. With just 8 days until an election many are calling the most consequential of our lifetime. Candidates are making their closing arguments. Former President Trump with a massive rally at Madison Square Garden in New York over the weekend. More than 24 speakers addressing the packed arena with a no-holds-barred, often profane endorsement of Trump and his campaign. 24 hours later, tonight, the Trump campaign is on the defense after a comedian at that MSG rally Sunday made sexist, racist, and crude remarks about Vice President Harris, Puerto Ricans, and black people. The campaign is distancing itself from the comedian who described Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage. Meantime, Vice President Harris's largest rally to date was Friday here in the state of Texas with Beyonce. The Harris campaign chose the Lone Star State in part to highlight the impact of Texas's restrictive abortion laws. And Harris tomorrow night is set to deliver what her campaign is billing the closing argument of her 3-month campaign at the Ellipse near the White House. With 8 days to go, 45 million Americans have already cast their ballots. And here in Texas, it's a state that has gained hundreds of thousands of voters since the 2020 election. What impact will those new voters have from abortion to immigration? We'll break it all down for you. And we're standing by to hear from a senior member of the Harris campaign. But we do begin with senior congressional correspondent Rachel Scott.
Tonight in Georgia, former President Donald Trump gushing about his massive weekend rally at New York's Madison Square Garden.
So last night we had a great rally at Madison Square Garden.
But that rally was marked by racism, sexism, and vitriol. Trump's campaign now on the defensive after speakers like this.
I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah, I think it's called Puerto Rico.
A Trump campaign spokeswoman saying that joke doesn't reflect the views of President Trump or the campaign. But this speaker was invited by the Trump campaign. And there was more than just that. This is what he said about Latinos overall.
And these Latinos, they love making babies, too. Just know that. They do.
The rest of those words, too profane to play. He also made a crude joke about black people and watermelons. And he wasn't the only person on stage to use racist language. Tucker Carlson mocking Kamala Harris, the first black and South Asian vice president.
Votes because she's just so impressive. As the first Samoan, Malaysian, low IQ, former California prosecutor ever to be elected president.
Today, Vice President Harris firing back, accusing Trump of fueling hate and division, saying Americans are exhausted.
What he did last night is not a discovery. It is just more of the same and maybe more vivid than usual. Donald Trump spends full time trying to have Americans point their finger at each other. Fans the fuel of hate and division, and that's why people are exhausted with him.
Those words about Puerto Rico sparking particular outrage. While the rally was going on, Harris happened to be greeting voters at a Puerto Rican restaurant in Philadelphia. Her campaign releasing this video.
Puerto Ricans deserve better.
Highly influential Puerto Rican superstar Bad Bunny then sharing it with his 46 million Instagram followers.
There is so much at stake in this election for Puerto Rican voters and for Puerto Rico.
He also shared this part of the video.
I will never forget what Donald Trump did and what he did not do when Puerto Rico needed a caring and a competent leader. He abandoned the island, tried to block aid after back-to-back devastating hurricanes, and offered nothing more than paper towels and insults.
In battleground Pennsylvania, Governor Josh Shapiro speaking directly to the state's 500,000 Puerto Rican residents.
If Donald Trump really wanted to disassociate himself with that, the first thing he would have said when he came onto the stage at Madison Square Garden was, hey, listen, I heard that person's attempted humor. It was not funny. I stand with the Puerto Rican community. He didn't do that.
Our thanks to Rachel Scott. Vice President Kamala Harris had several stops in Michigan today, focusing on the economy. At a semiconductor manufacturing facility in Saginaw, Michigan, she promised to create high-skilled jobs for people who do not have a college degree. And what were Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer and Kamala Harris doing at a bar together? You'll see that in a moment. ABC's Mary Bruce reports in from Michigan.
Tonight, Vice President Kamala Harris focusing on all-important Michigan, lasering in on the economy and boosting American manufacturing.
We're not going to have China beat us in the competition for the 21st century.
Harris visiting a semiconductor facility in Saginaw, promising as president to focus on creating highly skilled jobs for people without college degrees.
I believe that as we think of industries of the future and the future of America's workforce, we need to get in front of this idea that the only high-skilled jobs require a college degree. It's just not true.
As she travels through the key state, Harris saying she hears what voters are telling her about their kitchen table concerns.
They want to make sure that we're going to lower prices. They know that the price of groceries, for example, is too high. I know it too.
Over the weekend, Michelle Obama joining Harris on the trail for the first time. In searing remarks, the former First Lady said Harris is being held to a higher standard than Donald Trump.
So I hope you'll forgive me if I'm a little frustrated that some of us are choosing to ignore Donald Trump's gross incompetence while asking Kamala to dazzle us at every turn.
And in a campaign where abortion is a top issue, as Trump boasts about appointing 3 of the Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe versus Wade, Michelle Obama with an impassioned plea to men to take women's lives seriously.
Are you as men prepared to look into the eyes of the women and children you love and tell them that you supported this assault on our safety? And to the women listening, we have every right to demand that the men in our lives do better by us. We have to use our voices to make these choices clear to the men that we love. Our lives are worth more than their anger and disappointment. And we are more than just baby-making vessels.
Harris herself acknowledging she has to make up ground among men. Microphones picking up her conversation with Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer at a bar in Kalamazoo.
I've been bugging your whole team. I'm like, okay, we gotta do this, and this. But everyone's trying to set Yeah.
Oh, we have microphones and I was listening to everything.
Oh,
I didn't realize that. Okay. So, well,
you'll
now
bleep
you tell
my
us.
F words.
We just told all the family secrets.
All right, and that was Mary Bruce reporting. Maria is just joining me right now. And Maria, of course, there's been a lot of conversation about immigration all along throughout this campaign. Just give us a sense. You've been hearing what was said. That's getting a lot of attention just now, in particular with the Puerto Rican community, from what was said over the weekend, yesterday at Madison Square Garden, with regard to Puerto Rico being an island of garbage. But really, as you and I were discussing earlier, we've heard this kind of rhetoric now for months. It seems to be intensifying at this point. What do you say to the people who really just aren't sure. Should I be afraid? Are the migrants taking the hurricane relief money? Is crime on the rise?
I feel like that's a conversation I'm having all the time. And what I tell people is, you know, obviously, when you're at these or you're watching these Trump rallies, I mean, he is obviously pandering to our particular base of people. These are people that are going to support him in whatever he says. But in particular, when you're talking about immigration, what I do try to tell people is like, look, the apprehension numbers, the encounter numbers, they are much lower than they have been in years along the southern border right now. But if you look at, you know, more specifically what happened at the rally in Puerto Rico, yes, a lot of people will say, well, why does it matter anyway? You know, people that live in Puerto Rico can't vote, so is that a big deal? And the reality is like they may not be able to vote on that actual island, but they have family and lots of it here in our country. Those are the people that are going to go to the polls and vote because of what just happened and what went down. So I do think that, you know, people need to obviously do their own homework and research when it comes to immigration. I mean, obviously what we saw yesterday is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to hear a lot more about mass deportation, shutting down the open borders, and really what Trump can do that Harris can't. And I think the biggest issue that we're going to have is that Harris just isn't known for fact-checking Trump when it comes to this particular issue.
All right, let's ask you to fact-check. What are the numbers when it comes to crime and the number of immigrants coming over the border?
You know, listen, I think when it comes to crime, you know, we hear a lot about, well, you know, they're bringing migrant crime to our country. You should be concerned because we can make our country safer if you vote for Trump. Right now, what we are seeing, the latest numbers coming out, is that basically, you know, violent crime is down in our country, specifically when you're talking about murders, because we hear him talking about a lot of times, you know, the violent murderers, the rapists, those crimes, we've seen the recent numbers, they are down. And also, just to clarify, there is no such thing as quote unquote migrant crime. There is no law enforcement official out there that is going to be able to come in and charge someone with migrant crime, because there is no such thing. When we're looking at the numbers, we also want to talk a little bit about non-citizen voting. That's another piece of information or nugget that you always hear at these rallies. And I think that is just Trump laying down the base, the possibility that he may lose. He wants to blame it on something. He's going to talk about election fraud and about people voting that shouldn't be voting. But really, there is no data that supports that sort of rhetoric. I mean, really, we've seen GOP-led states that have come out and actually checked their rolls recently and have found a minuscule amount, a tiny fraction of people that are voting that are non-citizens. It is nothing like the masses that Trump has continued to talk about.
All right. Always appreciate your time and insight, Maria Villarreal. Thank you. Very good to be here with you in Texas. And joining us now is the Harris campaign co-chair, former New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Kamala Harris frequently says on the trail, we're the underdog. 8 days out, is that how the campaign views this in those 7 key battleground states?
Well, listen, we have always said from the beginning that this was going to be a very close race. Anybody tells you that they know how it's going to turn out really doesn't know what they're talking about. It's trying to figure out the exact spot that a hurricane's going to land. You just can't do it. We have a great ground game. We are working really, really hard. The candidate is doing an unbelievable job. And tomorrow, she's going to give her closing argument to the people of America. She's a prosecutor, as you may remember, and she's going to talk about the stark choice that the nation is going to face on next Tuesday. Somebody's going to be sitting behind the Resolute desk that is behind in the White House that's going to be the backdrop tomorrow night. And we can either choose Donald Trump, who's going to take us backwards. He's going to give us a very dark vision of America like they gave us yesterday in Madison Square Garden, which was just beyond belief. He is going to be a president that engages in grievance and has an enemies list. Or you can choose Kamala Harris, who's talked about a new way forward, talked about preserving democracy, protecting all of our freedoms, especially a woman's right to choose, and then providing incredible opportunity for people, building manufacturing jobs in the United States, making sure that people's costs are low, and fighting against the big companies to make sure that you've got a better chance to build for your family. And that's what you're going to see tomorrow night.
What do you make of the early voting numbers so far? 45 million. Does the campaign think that there's enough enthusiasm among Democrats? And can you still hear me? Oh, I think we've lost the connection there. All right, and we'll come right back in a little bit. Immigration is talked about a lot on the campaign trail, but how important is it to voters, and what methods do they support? We take a look at the polls next. Welcome back, everyone. Immigration has been called one of the top issues going into the election by voters. For a closer look, we welcome 538's Galen Druk. Galen, welcome back. Just how many Americans say immigration is their top issue?
Linsey, there are a couple different ways to look at this, but I think the most useful is looking at Gallup, because they have been asking this question for a long time. What is the most important problem facing the country? And according to that poll, 21% say that it's immigration. For comparison, about 45% say the economy, 17% say poor governmental leadership, and then everything else is in the low to mid single digits. And just to contextualize how much immigration has increased as an important issue for Americans, about 2 years ago, just 6% said it was the most important issue facing the country. So as we saw apprehensions at the southern border go up during Biden's administration, the concern amongst the American public also went up and eventually spread from just Republicans who saw this as a priority to then independents and increasingly Democrats, as, blue state governors and blue city mayors also started talking about the migrant crisis. So it has been on the rise.
And who do voters think has a better handle on immigration policies?
Yeah, it's pretty clear in the polling. ABC News just conducted polling with Ipsos, and by a 12 percentage point margin, Americans said that they prefer Trump on the issue of immigration. And that's in a poll where Harris led by 4 points nationally overall. So what that tells you is that there are millions of Americans who actually think Trump would be better on immigration, but plan on voting for Harris. And that's something of a turnaround. I mean, this was one of Trump's more unpopular issues back when he came down the elevator in 2015. And when he was in office, I mean, he got some of his worst approval ratings during family separation, which was a super unpopular policy. But of course, now, as you can see, according to the polling, as the migrant crisis has risen in the polling that I just mentioned, voters increasingly are turning to the harsher rhetoric and policies of Trump as a response.
Mass deportations, that's been a repeated promise from President Trump, despite many who say the logistics will be a nightmare, it's too expensive. How do Americans feel about the idea of deporting undocumented migrants?
Yeah, Linsey, this really gets at sort of what I was just saying, how the country has done something of a 180 on this issue. So today, in that ABC News Ipsos poll that I mentioned, 56% of Americans say they support mass deportations of all of the immigrants in the country illegally. That is a big turnaround from where we were a decade ago, when policies like building a wall along the southern border and mass deportations got a minority of support, just about a third of Americans supporting those. And yes, they were really popular amongst Republicans, but Trump had a difficult time engaging the majority of the country on these kinds of harsher policies. But we have seen that turnaround, and today a majority of Americans are supporting them. And far from having to sort of moderate in some sense on the issue, Trump is leaning into it, and Harris has instead had to moderate her party's positions. In 2019, she supported things like decriminalizing crossing the border and the like, and she's gone to the border and had to speak in more hawkish tones on immigration. And, ultimately the Biden administration as well supported the bipartisan border bill, which engaged conservative Republicans in a bid to beef up security at the border and make turning away asylum seekers easier. So we have seen the Democratic Party pivot more towards the center on this issue, while Republicans and Trump have remained quite hawkish.
All right, Galen Druk, always appreciate talking the numbers with you. Thank you so much. I know we'll continue doing it in the last 8-day stretch. Joining us now for more analysis is ABC News political contributor and former U.S. Senator from North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp, and Tricia McLaughlin, a Republican strategist and former senior advisor for Vivek Ramaswamy. Heidi, let's start with you. Looking ahead, tomorrow Vice President Harris is set to give her closing argument at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C., the site of Trump's speech right before the insurrection. Is that a fitting end note for the Harris campaign?
Well, I think absolutely. I think she's going to use some of the most recent examples to show why we are headed on the wrong track if we reelect Donald Trump to the presidency, and how we need to basically not go back and to go forward. When we look at the opportunity that she has tomorrow to have a big national audience, have a big crowd, kind of her response to what happened in New York, I think she's going to nail it. I think she's going to hit it out of the park. But let's not fool ourselves. You just heard some pretty tough numbers on the immigration discussion that we have, in this country. And one of the reasons why I would tell you that immigration is mass deportations have been supported is because you haven't really had anyone arguing the other side. I mean, can you imagine if tomorrow you said, okay, everybody in this country is out illegally, who's here illegally is out, what that would do to the American economy. And so I think we've got to be practical about where we move forward. Hopefully she will, kind of get that line where she needs to go in terms of immigration, tough on the border, making sure we have border security, but also looking at immigration as not just an emotional issue, but also an economic issue.
And Trish, I want to bring you back in here. We just learned former President Trump will give remarks to the press tomorrow morning ahead of the vice president's speech. Is there anything that he can say to distract from what we might hear from Vice President Harris and be effective?
Well, I don't think he necessarily needs to distract. We know that Kamala Harris's closing argument to the American people is twofold. Donald Trump is Hitler 2.0 and abortion. And this is really a change election, Linsey. As you know, 60% of Americans say that they want change from the Biden-Harris administration. Americans are paying 20% higher prices at the grocery store, 30% higher prices at the gas pump. Of course, we're facing multiple wars, both in the Middle East and Ukraine, and really instability at large, largely due to Biden-Harris incompetence. And of course, you all have been covering the immigration crisis, where more than 50% of Americans want mass deportations. This is coming off of when Kamala Harris in 2019, though she's backed off multiple of her positions, she said things like that she would defund ICE. She compared ICE to the KKK. She said she would legalize border crossings and that she would give illegal immigrants gender transition surgery paid for by the taxpayer. These are very unpopular policies, and since this is a #2 issue, it really speaks to the fact Americans don't have a lot of trust for Kamala Harris on these issues.
And Heidi, we hear Vice President Harris constantly hit the issues of abortion, immigration, labor, while also making claims of Trump not being fit for office. But what should her focus be 8 days out?
I think she needs to remind people that it is time for a new generation of leadership and that she represents that new generation. It's not going back to all the rancor and all. I mean, there's going to be people on the MAGA side. They're already voting. They're enthusiastic about Donald Trump. People are enthusiastic about Kamala. Now she needs to make a closing argument to somebody who is still sitting on the fence, who may say, I don't like either one of them. She needs to explain why it is that she is the better choice. And I think her best argument is, aren't you tired of what you saw last night at Madison Square Garden, where somebody calls Puerto Rico an island of garbage? Aren't you tired of waking up wondering what crazy thing got said last night? And don't you want to go back to arguing policy, dealing with the problems of this country? And Donald Trump is a distraction. And I agree. I don't ever use the Nazi word when it comes to Donald Trump, but he is a distraction and he is a divider, and she needs to make the point that she will unite the country around new ideas. She'll engage in the debate. She'll be a leader for everyone, and I think she'll do that. It's going to be at a very high level.
All right, Heidi Heitkamp, Tricia McLaughlin, we thank you both so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate you joining us. And that is our show for this hour. I'm Linsey Davis. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Have a great night.